The night sky over eastern Ukraine was not silent. It was holding its breath. Clouds rolled low, dragging shadows across the frozen earth, while somewhere beyond the horizon the ground trembled with the approach of engines. 150 tanks, a combined armored fist of Russian steel and Chinese firepower, were advancing into what they believed was an open corridor. The sound of their treads was like 1,000 hammers striking the bones of the earth. Every rumble carried the weight of arrogance, the belief that sheer numbers would crush whatever dared to stand in their way. But above them, far out of sight, the United States Navy was watching. From high-altitude drones relaying live images, to satellites mapping every movement, a web of intelligence wrapped around the battlefield. Inside a Navy operations center, glowing screens showed the massive column snaking forward. The officers didn't just see tanks, they saw weaknesses, blind spots, choke points, places where the armored giant could be cut down to size. Their data streamed straight into Ukrainian command posts hidden in forests and villages, guiding every move like an unseen hand. For the Ukrainians waiting in silence, every second stretched like an eternity. Men crouched in muddy trenches, hands gripping rifles slick with sweat, eyes fixed on the tree line. Engineers lay flat beside detonators wired to minefields that had been buried for weeks. Artillery crews sat frozen, their barrels already aligned with the coordinates whispered into their headsets. The plan was not simple survival. It was annihilation. Then, the sound came. Deep metallic thunder, shaking the frost off branches and rattling helmets. The armored column appeared at last, silhouettes of monstrous machines with glowing red optics piercing the night. 150 tanks, crawling like a steel serpent, unbroken, unstoppable, or so they thought. Target acquisition confirmed. A U.S. Navy officer murmured through comms, his voice calm against the storm about to be unleashed. The order rippled across encrypted channels, reaching Ukrainian ears. Hearts pounded. Fingers hovered over triggers. Somewhere in the dark, a wolf howled, a sound swallowed instantly by the roar of engines. The first trap snapped shut. An explosion split the night sky, brighter than lightning, louder than thunder. The lead tank disappeared in a plume of fire, its turret blown skyward like a toy flung by a god. Seconds later, the earth itself erupted as Ukrainian mines detonated in a rolling chain reaction. Fireballs leapt from the ground, tearing through steel hulls, flipping armored beasts onto their backs like insects. Screams of metal on metal drowned out human voices as the mighty column stumbled into chaos. But this was only the beginning. From hidden ridgelines, artillery thundered, guided with surgical precision by U.S. Navy coordinates. Shells whistled down like executioner's blades, smashing into clustered armor, shredding formations before they could react. Drones armed with Hellfire missiles swooped low, their cameras streaming every impact to Navy analysts who calmly directed the storm. Ukrainian operators, their faces lit by green night vision glow, released swarms of loitering munitions that hovered like vultures, then dove straight into engine decks and open hatches. The battlefield transformed into a furnace. Flames reached for the sky, black smoke writhed like serpents, and the roar of burning fuel mixed with the hollow cries of men trapped inside steel coffins. In less than 10 minutes, the invincible column had been cut into fragments, its confidence shattered. And still, the Navy's voice echoed in the Ukrainians' ears. Push them deeper. Do not let them retreat. The trap is not yet closed. The armored column tried to recover. Commanders barked orders through radios, their voices strained, struggling to regain control. Russian and Chinese crews slammed their turrets sideways, firing blindly into forests and hills, their shells lighting up the night with savage fury. But their targets were ghosts. Ukrainian forces had already melted deeper into cover, leaving nothing but empty trees and smoking craters. Every shot wasted was another moment stolen from their survival. Enemy coordination disrupted. Came the calm voice of a U.S. Navy analyst across secure lines. From a ship hundreds of miles away, electronic warfare teams had already begun flooding enemy communications with interference. Static screamed through Russian and Chinese radios, turning orders into garbled nonsense. Tank commanders pounded their consoles, shouting in frustration as their voices dissolved into broken fragments. The great war machine had been blinded, deafened, and cut apart, all without realizing the invisible hand guiding its destruction. Ukrainian squads moved like shadows. Armed with American-supplied javelins and their own locally built Stugna P missiles, they slithered into firing positions, launched, and vanished again before the enemy could respond. Fire streaked across the night sky, smashing into side armor, ripping turrets free, and leaving burning wrecks blocking the path of those still advancing. Each destroyed tank was not just a kill, it was a barricade, a roadblock that forced survivors into tighter choke points, exactly where the Ukrainians wanted them. And overhead, the storm only grew worse. The Navy fed constant updates, painting a digital picture of the battlefield. Satellite imagery showed where the heaviest clusters had gathered, and drones relayed live thermal signatures of every moving vehicle. "Shift fire, Sector Bravo 6, an officer ordered, and moments later, Ukrainian artillery shifted seamlessly, hammering a line of tanks caught between two minefields. The precision was terrifying. Shells dropped one after another in perfect rhythm, until nothing moved except fire. Panic rippled through the enemy formation. Chinese crews attempted to flank, breaking away to circle the death zone. But they ran headlong into hidden trenches and anti-tank guns lying in wait. Muzzles flashed, barrels recoiled, and more armored beasts exploded into the night. Russians tried to push forward, accelerating through fields to escape the inferno, but those fields had been sown with layers of anti-tank mines. The ground erupted under their treads, hurling machines into the air, tearing tracks apart, leaving twisted hulks clawing helplessly at the mud. The air smelled of burning steel and scorched earth. Flames reflected in the eyes of Ukrainian soldiers as they advanced cautiously, rifles raised, not to fight infantry, but to confirm the kills of machines once thought unstoppable. Some whispered under their breath, prayers mixing with the roar of battle, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Giants brought low, one after another, by a plan so ruthless it seemed orchestrated by fate itself. But this was not fate. This was intelligence. This was preparation. This was the US Navy and Ukraine working as one, weaving an invisible net that tightened with every passing second. "Heat signatures dropping," reported another analyst. 30% of enemy armor confirmed destroyed. Push them into Killbox Delta. And so the Ukrainians obeyed. Explosions on the left flank forced the surviving tanks to veer right, exactly where new ambushes waited. Hidden rocket artillery batteries, silent until now, lit up the night like dragons breathing fire. Rockets screamed across the sky, slamming into the disoriented column, detonating fuel reserves and ammunition racks. The battlefield shook as multiple tanks cooked off in violent succession. Turrets catapulted sky-high, fragments raining down like molten rain. Above, circling Navy drones captured it all, the inferno, the chaos, the slaughter, and relayed it back to war rooms where commanders watched silently, their faces bathed in the glow of fire transmitted from half a world away. They didn't cheer, they didn't smile, they simply marked another line on the screen. Enemy strength, reduced, mission, proceeding. But the battle was far from over. The enemy still had numbers. 150 had entered the corridor. Dozens still crawled through the smoke, determined to break free, unaware that the deadliest part of the trap had yet to be sprung. The survivors roared forward, desperation overriding discipline. Columns that had once moved with precision now lurched through smoke and fire, their silhouettes broken, their movements frantic. Every commander inside those steel coffins knew the truth. This was no ordinary battlefield. They had walked into a cage, and the walls were closing in. In the shadows, Ukrainian scouts whispered into radios, their voices steady despite the chaos. Coordinates flowed like blood through veins, reaching artillery posts, drone operators, and strike teams. But the most critical stream of information came from far beyond the battlefield. Aboard a U.S. Navy carrier strike group stationed in the Black Sea, intelligence officers bent over glowing screens, analyzing every movement in real time. Satellite uplinks painted the terrain with uncanny clarity, while high-altitude Global Hawk drones traced enemy signatures, marking survivors like prey. "Patch through coordinates to Delta Battery," a Navy commander ordered. His voice was low, controlled, but his eyes reflected the blaze consuming the earth. Seconds later, Ukrainian rocket artillery adjusted their aim. A new wave of fire thundered across the night, slamming into a cluster of Russian armor attempting to regroup. The ground shook as 1, 2, 3 tanks erupted into towers of flame, their ammunition detonating like fireworks. Electronic warfare units aboard Navy ships ramped up their assault. Frequencies jammed, enemy drones fell silent, and entire command nets went dark. Chinese operators tried switching to backup channels, but those too were drowned in noise. Radios spat static, digital maps froze, and armored crews were left blind and deaf in a hostile land. Some tanks even turned their turrets against allies, mistaking them for shadows of the enemy in the confusion. The once proud alliance of steel dissolved into panic and mistrust. Ukrainian infantry seized the moment. Crawling from trenches, they surged forward in small units, firing anti-tank rockets and planting explosives against immobilized vehicles. Fire blossomed across the battlefield, reflected in their eyes like the light of judgment. Some soldiers shouted war cries. Others remained silent, their faces grim, as though carrying out an execution rather than a fight. And above, the Navy unleashed a new weapon into the storm. A squadron of MQ-9 Reaper drones, armed and guided by naval intelligence, glided silently over the battlefield. Their cameras locked onto the densest concentrations of surviving tanks. Within moments, missiles streaked downward, each strike a dagger from the sky. Explosions tore through armored columns already drowning in fire and smoke, sending shockwaves rolling across the burning fields. For the enemy there was no more formation, no more coordination. Tanks swerved wildly, smashing into each other, some firing blindly into the haze, others reversing in desperate attempts to escape. Yet every movement had been predicted, every route already mapped. The Navy's watchful eyes had turned the battlefield into a chessboard, and the enemy was running out of pieces. Still, a handful of Russian and Chinese commanders tried to rally. Over encrypted short-range comms, they barked orders. Form up, push west, break the line. Tanks gunned their engines, steel giants charging as one, turrets flashing in furious defiance. For a heartbeat, it looked as if they might break through. That sheer weight might finally crush the defenders. But the ground itself betrayed them. As the charge thundered across a narrow valley, the earth erupted beneath their tracks. Rows of mines, buried deep and untouched, ignited in a rolling chain of destruction. Tanks were lifted from the ground like toys, armor torn apart, crews swallowed in fire. Survivors slammed their brakes. But it was too late. The valley became a graveyard in seconds, a corridor of fire and twisted wreckage. 70% neutralized, a Navy officer reported flatly, eyes never leaving the screen. His words carried no triumph, only inevitability. The plan was working exactly as drawn. Yet, in the smoke and ruin, nearly 50 tanks remained, damaged, disoriented, but alive. And desperation has a power of its own. They gathered, engines roaring, preparing one final push. Against the fire, against the sky, against the very trap closing around them, they would gamble everything on one last assault. The Navy analysts leaned forward, marking every survivor, every engine still burning fuel. Their voices whispered across comms to Ukrainian commanders. The last wave is coming. Hold the line. The kill zone is not yet complete.